Now, the European Union has unveiled its proposed strategy for artificial intelligence, including regulations on transparency and data protection. Brussels plans to put more than $200 billion into the sector over the next 10 years. It proposes creating European data spaces where researchers, governments and businesses would store and have access to shared data. It also wants new rules for the application of artificial intelligence, particularly in high-risk sectors like healthcare and policing. Well, for more on this, let's speak to NEAVE Barker, who joins us now live from Brussels. NEAVE, we've been hearing this over the last hour or so, the European Commission announcing all these new initiatives. What's the main priority here for them?
Well, the main priority for the European Union is to balance the rights of its many millions of citizens with the desire to actively compete with the United States and China that have much more relaxed attitudes when it comes to data regulation. So what the EU have done is come up with a white paper that they hope, after months of consultation, will end up being the backbone of future legislation going forward that will essentially dictate the kind of direction the EU will go in years to come. Will indeed, of course, the EU end up being able to fight off potential competition from outside the bloc? That is the big question. So some of the details in the white paper that have been discussed cover everything from facial recognition use in public spaces. It looks like the EU have backed away from a total ban for the next 5 years, leaving it down to individual countries within the EU to decide what kind of legislation they introduce. They've also talked about how environmentally sustainable data storage needs to be, and also, as you mentioned earlier, those high-risk areas that extra bits of protection may be needed. We're talking about access to healthcare records or security or policing records as well. So going forward, the EU has a tremendous amount that it needs to think about. And it does, of course, come at a major financial commitment. We're talking about many billions of dollars over the next decade or so, money that the EU insists is vital to ensure that the public here across the EU's 27 states have trust in technology.
NEAVE Barker there, live for us in Brussels. Thank you, NEAVE. Well, let's dig into this a little more with Mark Coeckelbergh. He's a member of the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence for the European Commission, and he joins us now from Como in Italy on Skype. So, Mark, the EU isn't really thought of as being very active when it comes to AI. The US has its tech giants, China has the government there leading the charge. What's fueling this push in the EU?
Yes, I think the EU is motivated to compete with US, with China. And it's very understandable that there's now a commitment, a financial commitment there to also invest. From the ethics perspective, I think it's an opportunity for Europe to lead, not lead perhaps in consumer goods, but lead for an ethical approach to AI. And I think we can see, if we see what the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, does and how it's seen by other countries outside the EU, I think there's a good chance for that. There's opportunities for that to kind of combine innovation and ethics.
Well, NEAVE, our correspondent, was saying there is this tension here, right, between trying to regulate this space but also to expand it at the same time. So how do you try to walk that fine line?
It is indeed a difficult balance to strike. I think it's important, though, to have an approach where over the whole line there's clarity on regulation, what the EU will do. And what we have in this document, I think, is that there's too much, things are too open, too much possibilities for regulation are presented. And it's not very clear what the EU is actually going to do in terms of detailed regulation. A good example is the environment and climate change. I think what could be done is much more clear requirements. Instead, we see some vague references to the importance of responding to these problems. And I think from an ethical point of view, I would have liked to see more concrete requirements and more sort of framework for robust regulation in this area.
Mark, I want to ask you more about that, because this white paper that's released was leaked already some time back, and there's already been quite a lot of criticism about the lack of consideration given to the environmental impact of AI. And I feel like a lot of people don't think about this a lot. I was looking at some numbers here. The volume of data stored across the world, data that would be used to train artificial intelligence, would likely quadruple by 2025. I mean, to 175 zettabytes. That's quite the carbon footprint when it comes to all the hardware needed to do that.
Exactly. Many people forget that all kind of information technologies in general, that they actually they're not immaterial things. They're not just virtual things. Also software, it's all connected with material devices, with infrastructures like data centers. And these infrastructures and material devices, they have to be produced, and that uses energy. They consume energy themselves. So it's important with each new development, if we now have an opportunity to regulate these new technologies, to seize the opportunity to also do it in a way that not only not harms environment, but also positively contributes to dealing with climate change.
And it's a space we'll continue watching very closely indeed. Mark Coeckelbergh there, a member of the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence for the European Commission. Thank you for joining us on Al Jazeera.
Thank you.